Welcome to the Book Flood Podcast. I am your host, Tom Nixon. Our guests this week are two of the creators of the Librarians documentary, Kim A. Snyder and Janique L. Robillard. Welcome, Janique. Welcome, Kim.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Oh, absolutely. Why don't we start a little bit with each of you giving us an idea of your career trajectory. How did you get to here?
Janique, I'll let you start.
Okay. I'm Janique. I'm one of the producers on the film, and I got into documentary filmmaking through journalism, and I didn't realize that motion picture was even an option for my career because I wasn't exposed to other people doing that for a living until I was finishing a journalism degree. But it kind of took into account the research, storytelling, interview, and get to make something out of that work. And I connected with Kim doing impact producing, which is the phase we're in now on the Librarians, on her and Maria's last feature film, Us Kids. And we did a lot of work after the film premiered to get youth voters registered and to the polls, and to reach community members with conversations about gun violence prevention. So that's how Kim and I first met and started working together before the Librarians film.
And for me, I grew up in a family of artists. My dad was an artist, and I thought I wanted to veer off from that and ended up doing graduate work in international politics and relations, and then made a unexpected turn in my to filmmaking through a series of events. And I kind of always felt like I wanted to be documenting history, basically. And some series of life events threw me into first scripted, the production track. In my 30s, I had a fairly serious illness that failed me for a time, and that unexpectedly threw me into documentary. That was my first, it was a very personal work called I Remember Me. And then from there, I just got very much into a track of making documentaries that lifted up voices that hadn't been heard, stories that hadn't been told by, and it ranged. I did a lot of short films. I ended up by happenstance in Newtown, Connecticut, and made a film called Newtown that tracked the horrible mass shooting that happened there. And I documented the grief and trauma of one community and the fallout of gun violence. And that unexpectedly threw me into a decade of storytelling around gun violence and grief and trauma and activism around that with the film that Janique's mentioning with Us Kids. And that finally landed us in a short that garnered us this time last year an Academy Award nomination, short film called Death by Numbers. Nice. And Janique and I did that together in Florida with a gun violence survivor that we had met in my former film in Parkland. And then one night I saw a story about a list of books in Texas in the fall of 21 that had been singled out, 850 of them, to be removed from library school shelves, and a group of librarians calling themselves the Freedom Fighters that were organizing and reacting to this. And that was 4 years ago. And so Janique and I and two other producing partners stayed on that track to make the film The Librarians.
What is the process you use when deciding to take on a project? What makes a good project? What is not a good project?
Well, for me, although the films that I've done have been, I guess, what we would call have a lot of social impact, they never originate there. I never set out saying there's an issue and I want to make a film about the issue. The stories have found me through a combination of happenstance, and I always say creativity and how these things originate are mysterious. They're a lot like romance. There's an attraction, you can't explain it. There's happenstance, there's luck. And then it's, the older I've gotten, the more I've learned to follow my instinct, because sometimes there's a number of those things. And you have to on this one, I jumped on it and said, we need to go to Texas and meet these women. I have a strong feeling about it. Now, back 4 years ago, one of those librarians said, we at the school libraries are the canaries in the coal mine. And little did we know 4 years later how prescient those words would be, because now this attack on our freedom, on our freedom of thought, our access to information has permeated the public libraries and the museums, and is just so topical. But we wouldn't have known that 4 years ago. So you really don't know. And you do, I think for me, like I said, it's an instinctual thing of finding stories. And I am a little bit spiritual about feeling they find me for some higher reason in the universe. These things find me and are meant to be, because they're not me. They are a whole group of people that find themselves together in a big village. Janique producing an amazing group of executive producers, and all these librarians that were like the Wizard of Oz. We just kept sort of going and finding a new story, and they build. And that whole community that was formed around this film is what's made this film. So I do feel like the impact it's having, which we could tell you about, is bigger than this sum of the parts.
Do you ever get into a project like this and then decide that it's just not going to work?
Yes, there are definitely projects right now. Some of them I have faith, if it's meant to be, sit with them. There's a couple of things in the vault like that we've begun that are more political, and in the environment we're in, as you well probably know, these are harder to land right now. They're with the consolidation of the streamers, but for a variety of reasons, sometimes the access becomes more difficult. But that's where you sort of say, this one, everything just kept lining up. There were and the same thing happened with Newtown. It's like, I don't know, like a video game where you keep, like, something keeps opening and you advance to the next. And I have come to say, I'm not going to say it's ever easy, but when those things line up where it's like, my goodness, this happened and then that happened, and you start to feel more and more like, okay, the doors are opening and this is sort of meant to happen.
Yeah, and I think on a micro level within each project, there's this was meant to be and this wasn't meant to be moments that you have to stay really kind of flexible and adaptable throughout each project, because at the end of the day, it's real life, it's real people's experiences. Like Kim was saying, access and trust and collaboration with all of our film participants is a big part of it. But the filming process on Librarians was 3.5 or 4 years that we were on the road and filming. So there would be times where you could think maybe the story goes here next, or maybe the story will end here, and you have to be patient, and maybe the thing you expected would happen doesn't come to fruition. And so there's that constant evolution of the story.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That I think I've observed that most good documentarians that I've respected, there's a kind of the pivot. There's the muscles of uncertainty, and knowing when to say, okay, I'm going to leave that character, I'm going to leave that direction, that storyline. And with the Librarians, it was such I used to say it's like an octopus, because how do you there were just cards all over the wall about the books and the authors, and it's just such a huge ecosystem. And how do you tell the story without talking about school boards, without talking about white Christian nationalism? And we did get, I think, a lot. So we started to see it as an odyssey. But I think the central thing for me was there had been not a lot, but we'd seen a number of things about book banning. But we hadn't seen really anything that talked about the siege on our librarians. And that's what we tried to stay through as a spine, is the idea that we were the shock of learning 4 years ago that we were living now in a country where the idea of arresting our librarians was actually a reality and on the table.
I am now a retired librarian, but once upon a time I was a library services manager for a large school district here in California. And all of this makes so much sense, except, I live in California, so we make assumptions about things out here. And you found a lot of your folks in places like Texas and Louisiana. But we had these things happening out here too.
Huntington and
right.
Exactly. And I was blessed that, we have just done so many things in the past year with this film, but we were invited just Friday. We screened, we did a panel with Governor Newsom and First Partner. And we were, I was standing there proudly with Martha, one of our librarians, because he was one of the pioneers in the country of passing important legislation of the Freedom to Read bill that's been replicated in, I think, 13 states that does have protections for librarians. So, we go around and we see the good and the bad, the kind of preemptive things and the scary things that are, in places more like Texas, Florida, Utah, and a whole number of states that we could name. But it's not to say that I haven't counted how many states. I'm sitting next to Janique, that's why I keep. I haven't counted how many states the film has screened in, but I would venture to say, if not every of our states, nearly every, maybe every, we should count.
I think since
Sundance.
Since last month that we did hit every state, because Mississippi and Oklahoma were two states that we still had not screened in until I think it was in January and February. We were able to do screenings there. But we did, like Kim was saying, film festivals and our theatrical release, and then community and impact screenings in
hundreds
library.
And hundreds. And these screenings have been a kind of field of dreams. It was a vision I had. What if, despite what we're hearing, a lot of doom and gloom in the independent documentary space, what if this film actually could show in theaters, libraries, campuses throughout the country with town hall-like conversations? And it's happened, and they're selling out, and they're selling out mostly in the middle of the country. And what I was about to say is, I think between our librarians, Janique and myself, sometimes together, sometimes on the same days, deployed into different states, we are seeing a lot of hope, but we're also seeing that there's rarely a place where someone doesn't say, this is happening right over here, or I had this happen. We had it. So, even in places like Berkeley and Cambridge. The message has been be vigilant and know that this isn't just, oh, that's crazy Texas.
You go down a rabbit hole there and it doesn't work out well for you because it's everywhere. Right. You mentioned the impact. How do you assess the impact of the librarians?
That's a great question. So once the film was premiering at Sundance, January 2025, we knew our impact phase or impact campaign, as we refer to it with documentary films, was also going to start at Sundance. So right off the bat, we were looking to align with different advocacy partners who were leaders in the freedom to read space and have them in the room with us, because like Kim was saying, these town hall conversations provide opportunities for local community members to connect on the issue, for librarians to be empowered that they are not facing this alone. Martha Hickson so often would refer to school librarians as sole practitioners. And what we were finding when we would meet and Zoom with librarians in Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, that there was this sense of battling these attacks in a very isolated silo. They were the only person in the community being attacked, and one said, I felt like I was the only sane person in a 1,000-mile radius. So it was finding empowerment and connection for librarians and building what we call Librarians Without Borders, and uniting them across districts, states, and even internationally in our work that we've done in the UK and Germany. It's also looking at being able to spark hyper-local civic engagement. So much of the film plays out in school board and library board meetings, county commissioner meetings in Llano, Texas, where Suzette Baker's story plays out, and really taking the opportunity when people are in the room together for those screenings to talk more about how they can get involved in their communities. And Kim, I don't know if you want to share more about in Texas what we saw in the spring and fall school board elections around that hyperlocal engagement piece.
Sure. I mean, I think the two of the standout, there have been so many stories of impact as we've traversed the world. But some of the standout stories are in Texas that we can pretty confidently say that we affected school board races in both cycles in 2025. Mm-hmm. In the Dallas area, we won an award at the Dallas Film Festival. There were sold out screenings. It was 48 hours before those races. And our subjects got up and said, we need you. There's about an average of a 6% turnout at school board races. And you hear in our film, Steve Bannon saying the school boards are the key that picks the lock. So the grassroots, the mobilizing we've been able to do of encouraging people to show up and vote in school boards, that this is not, we've learned also through these travels that it's not a partisan issue, or that it's cutting across those lines, and that, most Americans really feel that censorship is just so fundamentally un-American, especially when, like the character in our film, Courtney Gore, who's in the beginning, she's into this Moms for Liberty rhetoric or propaganda that there's obscenity in the school libraries. And she does the research and realizes that what's behind this has nothing to do with reality. And that this is a very well-funded political operative initiative to take down public education. So we saw that in Dallas. We then were invited to screen in Granbury, which is sort of an epicenter story in the film, where one of the book banning zealots in our film ran for that board on a sort of extremist platform, and she was defeated. We saw in the fall and recently really some hope and tea leaves in the recent election in Texas with Lee Wamsbaugh.
Yeah, Lee Wamsgams, who's the head of communications with Patriot Mobile, which Patriot Mobile has a PAC and organized to run, I think it was 13 different candidates in the 2022 school board cycle around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But a number of the school board members who they had campaigned for and poured tons of money into, as well as a number of candidates that were either from Moms for Liberty chapters or Moms for Liberty kind of aligned in their campaigns, were defeated last year. I think it was 33 Moms for Liberty candidates who ran with an opposing candidate lost their races. So like Kim said, I think people filling theaters shows us that people are open to conversations about book banning, that people are maybe frustrated, interested, curious about what's been happening, and hopefully watching the film and being sparked into some kind of action, even if it's meeting their librarians at the theater, getting their library cards, attending a school board meeting, speaking up at a school board meeting.
And we have a lot of plans in the works to do a lot of this with the upcoming midterm cycle in 26, to work very strategically throughout the country to make sure this film is available in these eventized ways to encourage this civic engagement on a local level. And the other thing we'll just throw in is that Janique mentioned the international. That was an unknown to us. When we screened, we thought, well, is this going to be seen as a sort of myopic American story, or will it resound beyond these borders? And luckily, well, I don't know about luckily, but we've learned that, we have screened at like international conferences in Toronto with heads of the most prominent libraries in the world there. We screened in the UK theatrically, but also at the Bodleian Library at Oxford. And behind closed doors started to learn back in June that those head librarians were telling us that this was seeping in over there, and that this same organized efforts and language was being verbatim exported from here, and finding, I think, organic homegrown sentiment in the same way. And we're seeing that in Alberta, Canada, in Australia. And one of the most touching things, I think, for us was that the day back in June, the day after our Librarian of Congress, Dr. Hayden, was fired. Back then, we got an email from the German National Library saying, in light of this, we just want you to know that there are hundreds of German librarians who know all too well what this can foretell, and we're inviting you to come to screen. And we did screen twice now. I went with Martha and stood in Berlin, arm to arm with German librarians at the 1933 book banning memorial. And we've been invited back to Leipzig to screen again with the German National Library. So the invitations are sort of exponential because of the proliferation of extremist right-wing developments around the world that often, as we know from history, take root in the library and with the books and with librarians. And but I said, I just like the Field of Dreams vision. The other vision I had was that by lifting up this story, librarians could pierce through this overwhelming noise that we're being assaulted with so many horrific things in the news, and that they would be symbolic of a sort of beacon of integrity, of standing up for what's right. And that's happening. And it's really cool that young people are taking that in. That's an unexpected. Young people are loving the film, and people say young people don't watch documentaries. Well, when they show up, it just happened on Friday again. They are riveted. They understand it. They know very well that books save lives for especially young marginalized people. And they understand that this is a real affront to their rights. So it's exciting to see this taking root in the youth movement.
The Librarians has won a number of awards. Is there one in particular that stands out?
Boy, I mean, starting out at Sundance and being nominated for the Grand Jury Prize there, it was a great start. And I think to date, we've won 28 awards, maybe. It's been really overwhelming. I think the audience awards are across the board. Juried awards are wonderful to be recognized by our peers, but I think the audience awards, when there's hundreds of people and sold out shows, is just so gratifying to know that that's why we wanted to invest in this kind of energy around the release of the film, is that we want this to be seen. We were shocked that when we released our trailer, the theatrical run, films like this, you expect maybe New York, LA. We've been in almost 200 theaters. We've been in, hundreds and hundreds of libraries. It's just been amazing that way. Knowing that the audiences we just get immediate feedback every day. Janique just recently was in Door County, Wisconsin, where we won our most recent award.
Yes, yeah. And someone said after the screening, we wished that they had just pulled up a bench and we could have stayed in the theater and kept talking. And it's like that type of feedback, like Kim is saying, from audiences that they really want to be part of this dialogue is the most meaningful thing, that it doesn't start and end when the credits roll. The conversation's not over, that this is a film that is continuing conversations. And I always hope that all the work that all of the film participants, all the librarians in the film, Kim, myself, our producing partners, and everybody who's been attending these screenings, to have these conversations, that there's takeaways, that kind of a ripple effect from the theater that people can go home and share more with others around them, especially now that the film is on PBS.
Just going to say
and folks are able to go and watch it. And hearing too, we were in Alabama recently, and that people with the film on PBS and streaming, people say, we knew it was available online, but we wanted to come see it with others. So they still came out on their Thursday night. They came out to watch it in a theater with other people. So that,
and
that
Tom, to your
most.
point about impact, you know, we're so proud to be partnering with public television, and we know they've been under attack. Independent Lens, I've partnered with them. They're a great strand, and they do metrics, and they said they've never seen in these surveys results, they've never seen this kind of feedback that, you know, I think, I don't know, 50% of people said that they were now going to go and vote in their school board races, all kinds of stats that are very encouraging about what this is moving people to do once they see it.
What was it like working with so many librarians and library-related people?
Well, for me, it's the gift that keeps giving. We're on a personal thread. These are personal friendships now. I couldn't have more respect. They give me hope and courage literally every single morning. I wake up in a time that it's easy to be really demoralized. And they're also, I mean, wicked smart and wicked funny. So it's just been, you know, I guess if I had thought about it hard, walking into the librarian world, that's one of the gifts of being a documentarian. You get to drop in to a whole new world. And so you're perpetually traveling, so to speak, in life. And I love that. It's being a perpetual student and an adventurer. Dropping into this particular world, it's just this constant, like, well, of course they have all this information. You know, like there's never a moment where there isn't a smart commentary, an editorial, funny exchange of ideas. I mean, they're just, who doesn't want to be around? And they happen to be a lot of women, although there's some great men that we've met along the trail. But how about you, Janique?
I think too, in the filmmaking process, you couldn't have better people to work with, because so much of the film is this digging up of archives, present day archives, news archives, information requests, lists, data, just all this evidence, right, of what's happening in the now, and then also that historical conversation. So one of the things that I think both of us took great pleasure in during the filmmaking process was if we were digging into a historical thread, if we could find anything that our librarians did not know, it was like we had really achieved something in our kind of then and now different key moments in censorship history, different landmark moves by librarians in the past. But it was always really exciting if we could unearth something that our librarians did not already know. So I think it pushed us to dig deeper, probably, in that discovery process.
We wanted to impress them, but I also just want to say that they have been so unjustly attacked, and the things they've gone through personally, with death threats, with being called groomers and I mean, the satisfaction I get of their sense of catharsis and vindication in these screenings has been, and being able to include them, has been incredibly satisfying, because they deserve it. And not to generalize, but, you know, our field, I am going to stereotype here, you know, it's got its fair dose of ego in the movie business and all of that. Librarian world, you know, as Audrey says in the beginning, who's anonymous then, you know, we're not supposed to be seen and felt. So I think as a profession, these really are teachers in general, people who are public servants, who are they're in the kid business. When it's school libraries, they do it for the kids. That dedication is so heartfelt, and their integrity to standing up for on the front lines of our democracy, it's so genuine. And I think we're living in a time where there's we need that. We're looking for these heroes. I do see them as patriots. They're really reclaiming my sense of patriotism, I would say.
So what's next?
Well, this is an unusual film for me in that usually a year out, you're like, okay, did that. Not the case. I think because of the time we're living in, we feel a responsibility and a doggedness to continue through 26 to be on the trail of using this film the best of our capacity for impact. And yes, there are other projects. And I think for me personally, it's I'm in rooms every night with colleagues in the documentary space talking about this merger, what that's going to mean. We also are facing the chilling effect. That's a whole other conversation. But like our librarians and what's happening in the libraries, that's happening in all spaces of the media. And so making films that are political, that are in any way unearthing the injustices we're seeing around the world and in our country are less and less likely to be funded and distributed. So those are choices. You don't want to make a film that doesn't get out there. So lots of talks about alternative distribution. We're very lucky with this film that it's being shown in every affiliate in the country through PBS, free on YouTube. Hundreds, as we said, theatrical, we've done it all internationally, broadcasters, BBC, ZDF. So this is it, but would that happen with another film right now that has political overtones? I don't know. And what that means I find myself thinking a lot more about what if and metaphor, scripted work, things that may have historical allegory. This film has made me much more excited about doing more with archives. Like, I really enjoyed it. So those are some of the things in my head. And also not adverse to things that are joyful. This has been hard. The films I've made for the last decade or so have been tough with trauma. And so I love music, and I do think that we have to, I just believe all of the arts right now, whatever arena, are going to be our salvation in getting through these times. And I'm very honored and feel very blessed to be in the creator side of it.
No, I agree with everything you're saying. Like Kim said, it's just hard to extract ourselves from the impact work that we're doing.
Addictive and compulsive right now.
It feels like we still have the ability to keep bringing people together for these conversations around our First Amendment rights and freedom of expression and protections for librarians and diverse library collections. And it's not the time to stop doing that. It's just too critical of a time in our history that we're experiencing. So we're really dedicated to continuing that work.
So I have a couple of questions that I ask everybody. And one of them is there a book or a series of books from your childhood that still resonates with you?
Well, for me, I loved Harriet the Spy. I loved all things. I did love Fahrenheit, but I was a Ray Bradbury freak. So anything that was Ray Bradbury, I just was like that. And as a younger adult, another banned book that had a big impression on me was Slaughterhouse-Five, Vonnegut. And then, of course, Toni Morrison. I mean, there's just, and now this project has gotten me more in touch with some of the modern current examples of certain banned books. Another huge one in my life was Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain.
One collection of books that my younger brother and I both loved when we were younger was the Choose Your Own Adventure series. Yes. Those were fun because we could read them over and over again. And the author actually has ties to our hometown in Vermont, and my brother was working at a local deli and made a sandwich for him and realized the connection to these books that we were obsessed with when we were younger, and he dropped off a stack of them at our house for us, which was really nice. But we loved just kind of the twisty, turny narrative of those. And I think I was always really interested since I was younger, and it makes sense with documentaries, but I would just devour any historical fiction or nonfiction ever since I was younger. And it's still memoirs and nonfiction books that are my main fare.
Well, Kim and Janique, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. For our listeners and watchers, please remember to like, subscribe, and share. And again, thank you, Kim. Thank you,
Thanks
Janique.
so much.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too.